Imagine I turn up, Xi Jinping turns up and goes, do your rubbish Cockney voice.
He goes, I love that. I bloody love that impression of me.
How do you know I'm from the East End, you muppet? Hello and welcome to what will be the last Telecoms.com podcast of 2020. And what a year it's been. At the start, no, I'm not going to recap the whole year. We haven't got time. But yes, we're all going on holiday next week, although that remains to be seen. Ian's trying to go to Slovakia. I'm trying to get to Canary Islands. I just found out last night that I got a quarantine when I get back from the Canary Islands. So we'll see. We might end up having to do a couple of remote pods in early January.
When are you coming back? Before January?
I'm coming back on like the 3rd.
Yeah.
Are you coming back?
So the first two I just think, do you know what? It's too much hassle. I'm just going to stay there.
We were supposed to be coming back on the 3rd, but changed it to the 28th.
Uh-huh.
Because we've got various... It's not just the EU thing. My wife's passport is due to expire in 4 months, and so is my son's. So
okay.
And there's the travel thing, isn't there?
You might have wanted to address that, like... a few months ago.
We've been trying to.
Oh, I see. It's just a massive faff, is it? Okay.
I mean, she can't do hers from the embassy here because it's sort of on half operations.
So right, she hasn't got dual nationality or anything like that? Oh, okay, fair enough. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. You know, we've got to do various extortionate tests and jump through loads of hoops and wear masks. In Spain, they're like wearing masks in the street is compulsory.
Yeah.
It's just doing my head in, man. Anyway, but I haven't seen my family's all out in the Canaries. I want to see them. This isn't just going out on a package holiday to get out on the lash and play Las Americas.
Yeah.
So there we go. So that'll be it. So we better crack on, haven't we? What are we going to chat about? We are going to chat about. We might as well start with 6G. Mm-hmm. I wrote about that this week, and there's some fun stuff going on there. Might even be opportunities for Pierre to splice in a bit of Terminator action at some stage. We're also going to... Perhaps we'll talk about cloud next, because that was the one that you wanted to chat about, Ian. So it's not just an uninterrupted
theme we've talked about
rant
before,
from me. Yeah, with cloud, and there's been at least one bit of news that's relevant to clouds and telcos. And then we're going to finish off on something that'll be relatively ranty for me, which is Facebook and some hassle it's getting from the US government.
Yeah.
And before I forget, if you're watching this on the site or on YouTube or on Facebook, while it's still alive, you can listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, and loads of other podcasting platforms. And before we get into it, I think we've got a bribe of the week this week, haven't we? Last night, Ian and I were on a one of those Zoom things with Huawei and a bunch of other hacks. And they'd set it up with some guy who we know only as Lloydie. I think he's got a sort of eponymous wine merchant thing called Lloyd's Wines.
It looked like he was in a wine cellar.
He was properly in a wine cellar. I know.
He had a much better background than anybody else.
I was having fantasies about lock-ins there and just death by wine. And they'd very, very generously sent us all 4 bottles of red.
Yeah. I was glad there was no white involved.
Right, so you're not a fan
of white at all.
You're not a fan. No. And we had to do this little game where we had to guess what the grape was, what the year was, and what the country it came from.
Yeah, you did all right. I'm useless at that sort of thing. I don't have a clue. Just don't know nothing about wine at all. I just like the taste.
Yeah,
of it.
I was doing all right until I got mixed messages from Lloydie and went Lebanon on one of them. Because he'd been talking up Lebanon. Right, yeah. I thought, is he putting that as a little clue? And then that was one of the options. And I don't know, I've never knowingly drunk Lebanese wine, but it might be all right.
It's supposed to be good. The Becker Valley does.
Might have had it, it might have been one of those ones at a party where you just go, that'll do.
It's red.
Yeah, it's red and it's got booze in it. So thank you, Huawei. Definitely bribe of the week there. There's a couple of people, who there's apparently bribes in transit from Vodafone, thanks to former show stalwart Jamie. And I think Virgin Media were threatening to bribe me as well, but neither of them have turned up. So you're not strictly bribe of the week. And I won't remember by the new year.
Orange is supposed to be sending something to me.
Oh, is it? I don't think I got
bribing me.
I don't think I got the orange one.
And 3, I think, and BT.
Sounds like
Yeah, but the BT one seems to be contingent on me coming to their thing next Thursday night.
Some quiz.
Which I don't think I'll be able to do because
it's true. I got that. Can't. I got that and just declined it.
At least another one of those things where they send the booze to you that you drink when you're actually
it's a bit cheeky. A bit cheeky to take the booze and then just not join in the thing, isn't it?
Yeah. They're a bit weird, these online. In
fact, that gives us one last little thing. I immediately before the Huawei thing, we were having a little internal Zoom goodbye for a colleague of ours who's leaving after being here for 20 years, which is Sophie. Yeah. So bye-bye, Sophie. You get a mention on the pod. That makes the 20 years all worth it, doesn't it? That's definitely the culmination of your career.
For the last 20 years, actually. It's not promotions or more money.
So if she wasn't going to leave, she would now because she's achieved everything she could possibly hope to. So that's that. Okay, we'd better crack on. 6G. The reason we're talking about 6G is there was a story this week which was Nokia is heading up this European Commission initiative to sort of look into 6G. I'm just firing it up on my phone so I can remember what I said about it because, I'm not getting any younger and things, I'm just going senile. No, I can't find it. How annoying. See, if I was really professional, I would have had it already queued up. Anyway, so they've decided that we need to, not we, as of about 2 weeks' time, is it? That Europe needs to be ahead of the game or at very least right up there when it comes to 6G. So they've got this consortium. They've got Nokia leading it, but they've got Ericsson involved as well. And
there's a few operators on there as well. Isn't Orange in there? And
yes,
a couple of others.
Yeah, there were a few European operators. I don't remember seeing any UK ones.
Well, it's an EU thing, though, isn't it now? So
quite. But I just thought I'd make that point pointedly.
We need to do our own initiative.
Yeah, exactly. And then you'll get some sort of Remainer type going, well, you voted for this.
6G Brexit.
Deal with it. He's like, all right, calm down, calm down. And no one's going to be able to leave the country anymore, and everything's going to cost tons of money. So I hope you're happy.
Yeah.
There it is. And my headline was Nokia chosen to leave Europe's 6G Hive Mind initiative. The reason I called it Hive Mind initiative is I was looking at some of the sort of areas of research. I think I'm going to find one little bit that I wrote. So there was a quote from Peter Vetter, head of access and devices research at Nokia Bell Labs. And I'll just read the quote because I made a comment on it. He goes, even though there's still a lot of innovation in 5G with the release of new standards, we're already exploring 6G in our research lab. In the 6G era, we'll see applications that will not only connect humans with machines, but also connect humans with the digital world. So that's where the hive mind angle came in. It's like everything sort of perma-connected, which is, kind of what we expect of 6G, but they're getting properly utopian/dystopian about it. Because then his second part of his quote, he goes, such a secure and private connection can be used for preventative healthcare. That in itself is starting to get a bit, preventive in what sense? Like if you're about to eat a burger to some little alarm go off, go, all right, mate, I think you've had enough
this week.
I've had a look at you and you do not need another burger.
The NHS says you're not allowed more burgers.
Yeah, maybe have a radish. And there he goes, can be used for preventative healthcare or even to create a 6G network with a sixth sense that intuitively understands our intentions.
That is pretty scary.
Do you know what I mean? It's not just me, is it? Making our interactions with the physical world more effective and anticipating our needs, thereby improving our productivity. I mean, it's just
making sure that you don't think nasty things about transsexuals.
Whatever, it's just so open-ended. But basically, plugging us into the matrix to make sure that we're better.
Interdimensional.
I don't like that at all. And I actually said in my next paragraph, I went, you're not helping, Peter. The 6G network with a sixth sense that intuitively understands our intentions. Are you having a laugh? And so, I just thought I'd bring that up as the 6G thing. I mean, I think it's great that people are chucking money at it and all that sort of thing. But I think what sort of shook me most about it is that they come up with this, what I consider to be quite dystopian stuff. And they laud it in a very unself-conscious way.
Yeah.
There's nothing apologetic. There's nothing cautious.
I think the trouble is that connectivity itself is actually quite. Once you get to a certain point, once you get beyond the point of it being the death of distance and people being able to communicate conveniently,
I like it.
It actually, it's a title of a book, isn't it, by a woman called Frances Cairncross, who used to work for The Economist. But
okay, well then you're better read than I am. I wasn't aware of that one.
Once it goes beyond that, I think, and it starts to become a bit dystopian anyway, and we're already at that stage now with. Arguably with what's going on with coronavirus and the fact that we can be monitored and tracked all the time just by the fact that we have a smartphone in our pocket. There's a data connection.
Health passports and stuff like that.
Yeah, you take it to the point where you might have implants or something. I mean, that's the ultimate scary one, I guess. Yeah. And of course it's terrifying.
The vaccine paranoid people reckon it's all just. The vaccine's just got loads of Bill Gates microchips.
It's about turning us into mobile antennas, apparently.
There was a great tweet from somebody who was like, I wonder what Bill Gates is doing now, controlling this 90-year-old grandma.
Yeah. Because, we should contextualise it. And basically this old girl in England was the first person, I think, in the world, certainly in the Western world, to take one of these new vaccines.
Specifically selected because
Russia's
she's
chucking these Sputnik vaccines around.
Well, they're nicking stuff to make sure that Sputnik works properly, now.
Is it?
Well, wasn't it hacked? Wasn't the Pfizer algorithm or something?
Oh, right.
The data repository was hacked, wasn't it? And there was speculation that it's the people behind Sputnik because their own thing's not very good, so they want the...
Right, they want a proper one.
They want a proper one.
They just basically sort of got a coronavirus and shouted at it and hope that'll...
And then, just give us the recipe.
Nobody trusts anything that comes out of Russia or China to actually work or be safe at all.
I was just going to say, they've been a bit quiet, haven't they, the Chinese on the vaccine, given the head start they had?
Well, I think they've been quiet on everything, haven't they? I mean...
Well, yeah.
No one really knows how many people have died over there with the actual virus.
There's almost no cases there.
No, it cleared up. We do know. We know it cleared up in about 2 weeks.
In a country of 1.4 billion people, they got on top of it fairly fast.
Do you know what they did? They snapped out of it. They pulled themselves together and just got on with it. That's how you cure a virus. You snap out of it.
It's just not come back.
It's not come back, I know. And without even a vaccine. Or maybe they did have a vaccine on the sly.
Yeah, maybe they always had a vaccine. What they did is they created it, unleashed it on the world, and they had the vaccine there to be able to inoculate their own population.
And they've been holding Trump to ransom, and they're going, all right. So all this Huawei stuff. Have you got any new ideas? Dangling this vaccine in front of him.
This is like a James Bond plot.
Yeah, it is a bit. Well, it's getting like that, isn't it, in the real world? So yes, going back to
6G.
Yeah.
And I think they struggle to not make it sound sinister because they're such advocates of this stuff themselves that they can't see the downside. They can't take a step back and sort of see the wood for the trees. They don't see where this is going ultimately. And there are plus points, obviously, all that stuff about productivity.
Yeah, you don't want to be a complete Luddite.
And being able to have a holographic chat with your dad, even when he's in the Seychelles, from your living room in Leighton Buzzard. All that stuff sounds really great and cool. But
does your dad hang out in the Seychelles a lot?
No, it's just a random example that sprang to mind. For some reason, the Seychelles came up before anywhere else.
Seychelles
dad. That's what lockdown does to you.
Your subconscious wants to go.
Yeah. That's because you're pining.
But I mean, they don't seem to be able to sort of see how sinister a lot of this stuff sounds.
And that's why I always revert back to, I admit, rather cliched and hackneyed Skynet comparison. But
it's always a good one to use.
Well, but the reason the Skynet comparison works well is that, of course, Skynet was supposed to be the dog's bollocks. And it's like, look, 100% operational record, everything's good. Taking the human error out of it, perfecting it through machines. And then, of course, the whole point of the dystopian premise of Terminator is that we relinquished too much power to the machines, and they took over. And then you got the Matrix one, which plays more into the sort of hive mind type of thing. And yes, and you just hear, these things come up all the time. You hear these people going, it's great. Like when we're talking, was it last week or the week before, we were talking about automation and Amazon and all that sort of thing. And they got the arsehole because I wrote a sort of bit of a semi-satirical take on their Managertron or whatever they called it. Monitron.
Managertron's a different one.
But their press release was full of it. Like, it's great. You hardly need to employ anyone.
Yeah.
And I, from a pure balance sheet quarterly reporting point of view, that is great.
Yeah.
And I'm a right of centre person, so I'm not going to start saying, all this silly World Economic Forum stuff where you've got to start worrying more about non-money stuff if you're running a company. Of course, you run a company to make money.
I think some of the, even some of the stuff that sounds like it could be fun and positive is actually quite sinister as well. Because I had a chat with the guys at the University of Surrey, which is quite important in the kind of mobile communications.
They've certainly been big on 5G, haven't they?
Well, they were big on 5G, and the guy who heads it up, Professor Tafazoli, who's one of the men I talked to on a Zoom call, is actually in the UK task force, the Telecom task force. He sits on that, which has only got about 10 people on it. So this is the thing that's led by Ian Livingstone.
That's it, yeah.
He's on that, and he was very heavily involved in 5G. So they're people to take seriously, and I had a chat with them. I mean, one of their ideas is, and I think Ericsson's talked about this as well a little bit, but they claim it's very much from them, is this sort of idea about an internet of senses, I guess, where you even have connectivity extending to things like touch and I don't know how it would be done, but you could basically have a connected taste experience or a connected smell experience.
Right, and remotely eat something.
I remember when they were telling me about it, I very much thought of that film. Have you seen a film called Strange Days with Ralph Fiennes, where it's set at the turn of the millennium, where people basically put chips into a visor, I think, and it transports you into this virtual reality world.
That's called Google Glass?
It's not just virtual reality. It's actually, you have the sensation as well. You actually smell things that you're there, and it's almost like being in a different place. And what happens is people invariably get lost in these environments. They become like drug addicts essentially, and you can sort of see this becoming quite already people are quite disconnected from reality, I think, this year with all the shit that's going on. You start rolling this kind of crap out, and nobody's ever going to want to have anything to do with their physical surroundings ever again.
They could combine it with lockdown and go, don't go out. It's full of viruses and bad shit outside.
Exactly.
Stay in and do this.
Yeah.
There's a bit of a tangent, but have you ever read any of the Red Dwarf books? So the TV comedy.
It's in series, yeah.
The books are actually really good.
Right.
Written by the writers of the show. And there's a whole book called Better Than Life, where it's basically an extended, which is a bit of a spoiler here, sorry everyone, but it's basically an extended, deeply immersive virtual reality experience with like electrodes into your brain. So to all intents and purposes, you don't know. So that's, again, quite matrixy.
Yeah. And this is what this internet of senses seems like to me. It's like you don't really know that it's reality anymore. How do you distinguish one reality then from another?
Well, that's where you get...
Have you seen the movie Surrogates with Bruce Willis?
I haven't.
No. I think I've heard of it.
It's basically everyone's at home and old and ugly, and
and they've got these
a better version of themselves in the actual.
That does ring a bell. Maybe I've seen bits of it.
Almost sounds like a Black Mirror thing.
Yeah. And you
it's an average
and so
movie. You're
like a brain in a jar, but you've got these robotic avatars that sort of
the
go
whole
out and
point.
about.
Spoiler alert is that at some point there's like some kind of like magnetic pulse that wipes out all their
and everyone's
surrogates.
got to just start.
So then they wake up and they're at home and everyone has to look at themselves in the mirror and they're old and just ugly and they come out on the streets.
Yeah, that sounds like my Monday mornings.
Well, after that late night dream, about being Chris Hemsworth or something.
Actually, I had a shitty night's kip last night. For some reason, I woke up at 4:30 and I couldn't get back to sleep. It was weird. I blame Huawei.
Yeah,
and it's pricey wines.
Mixing different wines.
So yes, I mean that. So you get into that sort of, how much is too much, and of course, any technological leap always comes with Luddites, always comes with fear of the unknown, and all that sort of thing. And when you combine this sort of virtual reality stuff and this everything connected stuff with AI, and some of the stuff this guy that I quoted talking about how it just anticipates what you want, and you're like, well.
But the Luddite example, I think the trouble with what's happening now is because it's happening at such breakneck speed. Previous sort of technological advances, I think, have played out over a much longer period of time, and it gives humanity time to adapt. And even then, it's difficult, as the Luddites themselves showed. That having to adapt to circumstances where machines have suddenly become available and it's changed working practices, in a really dramatic way is a really. It's a hard thing to do, but at the moment, we're talking about, we've only just had 4G, really. We've only just had data on a phone. It's not that long since the internet came into existence. And now we're talking about stuff like...
Vision.
Exactly, and the Managertron and...
and Skynet
so
and
it's pretty
and the Matrix.
Scary.
Well, and you just feel sometimes they get ahead of themselves. Like we used to, do you remember in the years in the run-up to 5G, we'd take the piss a lot out of a lot of the utopian use cases. The ultimate one for me was always robotic surgery, such that one Mobile World Congress, this guy, really nice guy called Misha Dola, who's like a professor at King's College and is really dialed into all this stuff, was reading my heretical stuff and got in touch with me on LinkedIn and went, Jesus Christ, Scott, we better meet up, because he felt I was kind of raining on his parade. And we met up, and he showed me he had a little demo thing at Ericsson's booth, and I wrote that up. But I stand by it.
Yeah.
It felt that talking about robotic surgery was getting very ahead of itself. I understand it's a use case specifically for the low latency side, and so
Can't you do that with fiber? Like, wouldn't you be doing this in
possibly,
a hospital with a fiber connection?
Yeah, you could.
This is one of the questions about 5G though all the time, isn't it?
Yeah.
That what's the latency advantage when there are a lot of scenarios it gets talked about being used in where you could actually roll fiber out.
Exactly. Like this is from an actual remote ambulance in the desert. Then
that's a good point. There are advantages. In fact, I've got another little tangent which involves Huawei again. I dialed into a little tour they did of something called Galileo this week. I don't know if you were invited to it.
But I didn't do it.
Yeah.
It's on Tuesday.
Wednesday, I think.
What was this other wine tasting they had on Tuesday? Sorry, getting off on a bit of a tangent here.
I think maybe they had just several sessions.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, because they were talking about it. One Huawei bloke's got 8 bottles of wine, each with one sip taken out of it, and he's got to deal with them.
Brilliant.
I know. No, this was like a demo of what was basically a sort of Mobile Congress booth on steroids.
Yeah.
And they've got this demo. I think it's in their Shenzhen sort of super campus. They were very kindly saying, "Oh, Scott, hopefully next year, when everything's sorted out, we can get you over here." And I was going, "Yeah, that'd be great." Thinking, I'm not sure I want to risk going to China. Some of the stuff we talk about on this podcast.
You get arrested straight away, mate.
Do you know what I mean? No. I'm just not sure. Seriously, man. I mean, who knows? If someone's sitting there,
yourself.
Yeah, I don't think I'm the most important dissident in the Chinese sort of security services radar, but you just never know. You just end up on a database.
Yeah, but they might love your Xi Jinping impression.
Yeah, well, that alone rules me out.
Oh, it's the guy. Do it. People taking pictures.
Imagine I turn up, Xi Jinping turns up and goes, "Do your rubbish Cockney voice."
He goes, I love that. I bloody love that impression of me.
How do you know I'm from the East End? You muppet. Anyway, so there we are. Now I'm further ensured I'm never going there.
Hey, but what's wrong with that accent? Nothing's wrong with that accent.
I know. Look, you just hear about people getting disappeared, and so I just don't trust totalitarian countries. No offence, China, but the same would go. For other countries, I wouldn't go to Iran. There's a bunch of places I wouldn't go. I wouldn't go to Venezuela.
Even your wife is from Iran.
Yeah, and your wife's from Venezuela, isn't she?
I've been. Yeah,
you've been. Yeah. It's all right. It's not that crazy.
You kind of get shielded from the real stuff.
Okay. Anyway,
you wouldn't though, Scott. No, only if you know people there.
I certainly wouldn't go to Iran, but that's a different matter. There's that thing with like Nazanin Zaghari.
Oh God, yeah.
Anyway, so
6G.
Yes, no. So the reason I mentioned this Huawei thing is it actually isn't a 6G thing, but it is relevant to this sort of everything connected. What was the name of that book that you were talking about? No Distance.
Death of Distance.
Death of Distance. Yeah, because this was just over a normal broadband connection, but there was almost no lag with me chatting to these two guys who were doing the tour in Shenzhen. So this is thousands of miles, 10 time zones or whatever, 8 time zones. They were in the middle of the night, bless them.
Yeah.
And they were able to go and show me all this stuff, which was fine. I mean, a lot of it was your standard sort of Mobile Congress, these are the cool shit that you can do with 5G type of stuff. They did make one point which is relevant to sort of Pierre's pushback on the robotic surgery, because they're talking about like smart ports, for example. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these things are connected, but with fibre. And of course, those cables wear out eventually with all these little machines scurrying backwards and forwards. And so you don't have that kind of wear and tear, obviously, with a wireless connection. And if the wireless connection does go down, it's presumably a lot easier to fix than a cable that snaps. But yeah, what really struck me with that was just be able to have this. I was sitting there in my little office, my little home office, chatting to these people in China in real time, actually having a dialogue. There was barely any delay. And I thought that's quite impressive. And that's like a precursor of the kind of things they're building up to with later stages of 5G and moving to 6G, where, let's say we're sitting here with heads-up display, Google Glass stuff on, and everything's connected the whole time, and I'm controlling this and I'm doing that, and everyone's being super productive and efficient because the connectivity's seamless. The thought of even having to pick up a phone might, in 10 years' time, seem alien.
Yeah.
It might seem just totally anachronistic because you just got something in your ear.
Yeah.
And you just go, phone in, and straight away it gets through, and you go, all right, Scott, and you go, you're coming out.
Which is scary as hell. It's like
Joachim Phoenix and her. Yeah.
The idea of things being embedded, to me, in people really is. It's like the move from cash to to virtual money in a way, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a step further to sort of making it a part of the person, and you don't have. You're taking quite a big freedom away when you do things like that.
Well, as long as it's voluntary. I mean, this is how I feel about the
I don't think
vaccine.
it is voluntary though, is it? With virtual, I mean, this year has been an imposition of people using contactless payments. Increasingly you go in shops and you can't use. It's almost there could be a conspiracy theory that we've been.
There's plenty.
There are a lot of conspiracies, but one I haven't heard is about the sort of money side of it. I mean, Margaret Atwood, who wrote The Handmaid's Tale, which has been dramatised on Sky.
Mm-hmm.
This is, I think, she wrote that book in the HBO in the 80s. She predicted that then. That's one of the most striking things about that book is her prediction that we'd move from a cash-based society to a cashless one where you had cards and
thus everything you do is tracked.
And the premise in the book is it allows the government to cancel the accounts of women, basically. I mean, it's quite a feminist book, but
she doesn't mind a bit of that.
But it is a good book. It's very dystopian. But this move that you see the government, and you sort of think to yourself now with what's happening.
That's just digital. To coin a phrase, digital transformation. But as soon as things become digital, they become
digital
trackable.
Dystopia.
Everything's logged.
Yeah.
I think this year we've all learnt to particularly crave just meeting up in a pub, getting pissed and talking shit,
and paying for it with a £10 note.
People used to write their opinions on paper that they could stow away in a drawer somewhere.
Yeah, there's all these little things. So I hear you. I mean, you'll probably start getting little enclaves of people who only use cash. And I'm totally guilty of it. I use my phone half the time, so Google knows all my buying habits. If it's using it to sell me stuff, it's failing utterly.
Yeah.
But then what's it going to do? Sell me beer? Yeah, all right, Google, well done.
But I'm the same. I've embraced it, and I very rarely take money out of a cash point these days, and I just whip out my credit card, my debit card in a pub, and I was doing this before this year, but you don't really think about the consequences until something like this happens, and all of a sudden this year everybody's talking about civil liberties. And
so I take your point about voluntary. There's force, and then there's just evolution.
Convenience.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like sort of the sort of frog in warm water analogy,
totally.
Isn't it?
No, that's exactly what it is, and that's what's interesting. Like I've been feeling quite twitchy about health passports, not because I'm like an anti-vaxxer in inverted commas, although I've got to admit I wouldn't want to be one of these first people to try this thing out that just got whipped up.
No, good luck to that 91-year-old who, let's just say, who.
But fair play to him. And if it's all fine, then great.
Yeah.
But I'd like to have a few months of people guinea pigging themselves.
So would I.
Before I give it a go. I mean,
fortunately, you're at the age where you will probably have a few months before.
Yeah, I'm not high priority.
So.
Although I'm only 1 year away. I'm 49. I'm only 1 year away to going up a priority level. But
he'll be watching us to see if we drop dead because he's even further down the priority list.
Yeah, but how do you know it won't just be because of alcohol abuse and just general wasting our lives? But yes, so when they start talking about, so obviously a forced vaccine is totally dystopian. People come into your house holding you down while they stick needles in your arm. That's totally out of order. But then you've got the softer force where they come up with things like health passports, where they go, no, it's your choice, but if you want to leave the house, and you're like, well, it's not much of a choice, is it?
Yeah.
So, we'll see how that goes. I mean, one Tory minister let it slip about health passports and everyone freaked out. And
that was the guy in charge of the whole programme, though, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. The guy who founded YouGov.
I think that's for travelling, though, mostly.
Well, yes, health passports.
But it might be
the bit thin end of the wedge, isn't it? If you can't travel, then maybe you can't travel internally, or maybe you can't get gigs.
But it might not be the government that does it. It might be. I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing the government coming along and saying you can't impose restrictions that force people to say they've had the vaccine. Some
airlines are already doing it.
The airlines are saying you have to have, and what's to stop a pub from saying you can't come in unless you've got a bit of paper saying you've had the vaccine? They're already now sort of forcing you to go through all these, wear face masks and
pretend
do
that we
things
live
to get
together.
into the actual door and pretend you live together, exactly, if you're from a different household. Yeah. Which we'd never do anything like that, obviously, Scott, and we haven't done. But
definitely.
But what's to stop them from saying the same thing? You can't come into our shop unless you've got a health passport.
Well, quite. So that's where the slippery slope thing. I know slippery slope's a fallacy, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a concern about the slippery slope. Anyway, we better move on from there because it's done about half an hour, and we got a hard stop at 3.
Okay.
Cloud. So did you write about Deutsche Telekom getting cozy with Microsoft? I'll hand it over to you then.
Yeah, I mean, there's various aspects to this deal that Deutsche Telekom's just done with Microsoft. But the one that stood out to me that was most interesting, and which we've seen happening with other companies recently, so there's sort of a growing trend, is for Deutsche Telekom to be moving most of its IT systems into Azure. That's one big.
So we just had that with Nokia a while back, and we chatted about
very,
it.
Very similar to Nokia. Yeah. So moving a lot of the back office IT stuff that has been done sort of in house or in their own kind of cloud, in their own.
And who did
clouds.
Nokia go all in on? Was it Google?
They did it with Google.
Yeah.
So this is with Azure. And they're not the first telco to do it. AT&T did something similar about a year ago. 3UK is doing it at the moment.
Right.
They're moving about 90% of their IT systems into Azure. And the impact on the reason they're doing it is because of costs. Basically, it's just a more efficient way of doing it. So Deutsche Telekom's said it wants to realise savings, but it hasn't come out with any specifics. But I remember being at the press conference where their former CEO Dave Dyson was talking about all of this stuff, and he was saying they cut IT costs by about a third, but also kill about 2/3 of IT jobs within. I mean, he's pretty upfront about it.
Did he use the word kill?
Maybe this is. He didn't use the word kill. No.
He wasn't that upfront.
He wasn't that upfront. But he did say 2/3 of jobs would go, basically, and
rubbing his hands together, thinking about the margin improvements.
Yeah, exactly. And so Deutsche Telekom's done this now, and there's this sort of a lot of analysts and people that we talk about without mentioning them sometimes seem to be real sort of cheerleaders for this decision to move stuff into the public cloud, like it's a no-brainer. Why wouldn't you move stuff into the public cloud if you can save money and it's a more efficient way of doing it?
There's no downsides
What's
at
the
all.
downside to doing it? But I mean, it's funny, the operators, they sit around all the time at the moment moaning about Ericsson, Nokia and Huawei and how there's this horrible sort of oligopoly in the radio market and they want more competition. And meanwhile, there are these 3 big US tech firms that they're
selling their souls.
Exactly. And I just, there's a real sort of disconnect there. And I find it really odd in the case of Deutsche Telekom, because I remember being at a press conference 2 years ago in France, actually. It was an Orange event, but they had Timotheus Hertges, the CEO of DT there.
It was like one of those French Open jobs.
It wasn't a French Open job. It was their Hello Show, they call it. They usually announce something. Orange usually announces some kind of innovation.
Okay.
And they had Deutsche Telekom there because they've been working on this smart speaker together. And it was very much presented as a kind of answer to the US tech giants, that all the innovations led by them. And this is our attempt.
Amazon.
Yeah, and Hertges was standing up there saying it's shocking that all this data is stored in cloud systems that are owned by US tech companies. I mean, I quoted him in the story I wrote this week. And now this week, look what's happening. And I was thinking actually about the conversation we had when I wrote the story about conversation we had on the podcast a few weeks ago, where you were talking about Google, the photo system.
Then suddenly starting
totally different market,
charge.
but it's still cloud. You basically you sign up to Google and you put your photos in its storage systems, and it's all free and jolly. And this has been going on for years. And all of a sudden, a few weeks ago, they said, "Oh, hang on a minute! From next year, you're going to have to start paying." After this long period where they've been sort of squeezing out anybody who might have wanted to come along and actually charge a bit of money for this.
It's like someone offering you a bit of smack for free until you're hooked.
Exactly. And I just sort of thought, well,
for years,
could a similar thing happen in telco IT systems? When all this stuff's moved into these public clouds, and they're all dependent on it's a very crude analogy, and I'm not saying that it's going to be exactly the same, but it's
I'm all for crude
it's a question that needs to be, because people would say, well, why should we worry about it? And maybe there's a reason to worry about it. Maybe looking at that situation with photos is a reason to start thinking about what could happen in the future.
Well, so I think the broader concept for me is renting rather than owning. So there's two examples of this that always bother me. I've just gotten to Spotify, but I always used to, and that's only because of Rogan. And I always
didn't have any music service before?
No. I would buy CDs, burn them onto my laptop, and then transfer them onto phones and all that sort of thing. So it's all about transferring files.
He's
old school. You would buy a CD like on Amazon and get it delivered to you, and then...
Yeah, I mean, sometimes Amazon does this auto rip thing where it gives you the digital download immediately, so you don't have to go through
CDs,
the faff of
not cassettes.
Up yours. You're not that young, son.
Vinyls,
yeah. 8-track.
Still got your Sony Walkman?
I did. I was a big Walkman fan.
So was I.
That was a real liberating thing for me.
I think everyone was.
Yeah. I even bought I remember getting a Walkman for Christmas that had a recording capability and a radio tuner, so I could record shit off the radio.
Wow.
Because that was back, we used to do that, didn't we?
Yeah,
We'd record stuff off the radio. And then you get all those people going, oh, if you do that, it's theft. You're no better than a terrorist. Anyway.
And Napster came along and suddenly didn't seem like such a crime.
I know, and my favourite band killed Napster, Metallica. Anyway, that's a bit of a tangent.
Are they the ones that killed Napster?
Pretty much, yeah. The Napster originally, this was early 2000s, I think. Metallica, probably specifically Lars Ulrich, because he's the more business-minded of the two people who run it, which is him and James Hetfield. Or at least is what I think, I don't know. If you're watching, James, no offence. And he just went, hold on a sec. They're just this is when file sharing, people would talk about file sharing, that was in the vernacular. And you go, hold on a sec, how come people can just share all our shit for free?
Yeah.
And he took them to court and they won, and it basically set the precedent that drove Napster. And then, lots of metalers going, oh man, you're out of order, Metallica. But no, I think fair enough. Metallica...
How would they get paid otherwise?
Yeah,
this is the discussion that's gone on with piracy for years since then, hasn't it?
So,
So they only make money from their tours and concerts? No.
Well, quite, yeah. I mean, to be honest, that's the way it's gone
the way it's gone now, isn't it? Because they've been forced into these deals with Spotify and Google Music or whatever it is.
I think...
So they don't make anything near what they used to out of...
I think all Metallica did was sort of delay the inevitable. I mean, I've got an external hard drive with about a zillion bits of music on it.
Yeah.
Every time I get a new computer, every time I get a new phone, every time I get a new device, I just copy the stuff I want from that over again. I never have to re-buy. And half of that stuff I just got off my brother. So I haven't bought it ever. I'm probably admitting to criminality here. So yes, basically, as soon as people started file sharing, as soon as MP3 files existed, the writing was on the wall. And as you both rightly say, pretty much the only wedge to be made out of music these days. So it used to be that you would tour to support the album. Now you produce an album to drive footfall to live event. Yeah. So presumably this year's been absolutely catastrophic for, they've tried to do these little Zoom things, but no one's going to pay much. Even for Metallica, I haven't paid for like any Metallica stuff.
Well, you go to a concert for the atmosphere, putting a Zoom thing on, you might as well
to
just
be around
listen to
other people all bouncing around and moshing and all that,
getting drunk.
Yeah, but then Ticketmaster rapes you.
Well, yes, that whole process is pretty foul. That's a tangent. What were we just?
We were talking about the cloud.
So so that's it's sort of renting versus owning. So the music one is one example of that, and then the other one that bothered me. I remember when I bought my first house in London. In London, most houses are leasehold.
Yeah.
So you drop £250,000 on a house, and you don't even own it.
Yeah.
You only own. You have to renew the lease after however much time, which just seems absolutely absurd to me. And we ended up on that house buying the freehold because the freeholder just went AWOL, and there's a process that you can get it off an absentee. But that whole thing, again, bothers me. And then obviously renting, if you can afford to buy a house, that's much better, because renting, you're just throwing money away.
Yeah.
At least when you buy a house and you pay the mortgage, you've got an appreciating asset in theory.
Yeah.
So those are just two examples of why I prefer owning rather than renting. And to go back to your point about moving into the public cloud, it just feels like you're you're handing over all your stuff to a landlord, aren't you?
You are. That's exactly what they're doing, and it's not just one land. It's the fact that there's such a small number of these companies around anyway. That's the worry.
Yeah. So
why are they so worried about limited competition in the radio access network market? And yet, in so many other areas, let's be honest, it's not just IT systems being using the public cloud. We see all sorts of deals being done nowadays between telcos and either Google or Amazon or Microsoft to do with the edge or to do with some kind of services tie-up. And there's no other alternatives to those players. It's those three.
Yeah.
The only other ones you could possibly think about using are the Chinese ones, which is probably not going to happen that much these days. Let's be honest, for geopolitical reasons.
Yeah.
So it's a
And to be quite honest,
they're so much more powerful than the radio access network guys are. Let's be honest, as well.
No, I hear you.
Economically,
and the amount the amount of hold they have over you.
Yeah.
So everyone's, obviously the rationale for victimising Huawei is that they might be beholden to the Chinese state and the Communist Party. But I still reckon there's probably a limited, especially if they're not in the core, there's a limited amount of mischief Huawei could get up to, even if you believe the worst characterizations. Whereas someone who just owns all your intellectual property, or at least doesn't own it, but has possession of it on their servers, then they just suddenly change their T's and C's. You always get these people going, well, our policy says this. And so then they change their policy.
Oh, I'm sure they've drawn up all sorts of legal stuff about, we have ownership of the data, even though we're doing this and all of that. But the point is that, if this trend carries on, because as I say, it's not just Deutsche Telekom. Telstra's done this to a certain extent. Telefonica's got to deal with Azure, 3UK, AT&T. Yeah. There's an increasing momentum building for this to happen, and you've got all these evangelists out there, like people that we won't name, but we see them tweeting about this a lot, urging it to happen. And basically the upshot is that US tech giants are going to manage IT telco systems in the next few years. And then the telcos will have ceded control of all of that to them, and then what comes next? Probably moving your network functions into the cloud as well, which is happening to some extent as well.
NFV's been all about for years.
So that will probably go there as well. In the meantime, what are they also doing? They're selling physical assets like towers that they use to drape their masts on, to drape their sort of base stations on. They're selling the towers. So they really are becoming...
the tower companies...
So companies like Cellnex is the big one that's emerging in Europe.
They could just suddenly one day go, nah...
You owe us this, and sorry, what was your alternative?
We're going to use these towers to just put scarecrows on the top because we fancy it.
There's a lot of things happening in telecom at the moment strategically to do with this, and it is the renter versus landlord ownership analogy to me. That are really questionable, I think, from a long-term perspective. And I think we'll get to a point in 5 or 10 years' time, maybe, when people go, hang on a minute, that was a really stupid thing to be doing, wasn't it? It'd be almost like sort of, BT's decision back in the day to sell its mobile phone business, when it sold what was then O2.
What did it used to be called?
It was O2. It was the O2 business that it sold. It was BT Cellnet, and then it became O2. It got sold and became O2. And at the time, nobody really questioned it that much, I think, because it seemed to make sense from a financial perspective.
And then they go off and drop $5 billion on EE.
They become a broadband business, and then all of a sudden it looks really daft if you don't have mobile anymore, and they have to buy EE for 12.5. Yeah, 12.5, I think it was, wasn't they? Spent on it, but I, the thing that really worries me about this is the fact that it is this small number of very big, exclusively US firms that are. That are taking ownership of this area, and I don't think that's good.
And if we're asked to characterise the Chinese as uniformly malevolent, are we asked to characterise the US as uniformly benign?
Yeah.
Because some of the stuff they've got up to this year doesn't paint such a clear picture.
These are privately owned companies, so they're not accountable as much to.
Well, actually, so that's...
If China was a democracy and Huawei was a public sector company, then... or if it had state involvement.
The point is, it's not as black and white as that, is it?
No.
Actually, that's quite a natural sort of transition onto the final thing, because at the same time, not even the US government trusts these web scale companies because they're constantly trying to sue them. And they're in the process of having a go at Google. They're probably going to have a pop at Amazon at some stage. How much of this is just a shakedown? I'm not sure. Because I think there's a well-trodden path of like big companies. The state gets involved and goes, well, you've been naughty. But I tell you what, I think this can all get sorted out if you just chuck us a few bucks.
Yeah.
It's not normally quite as sort of, the extortion is not normally quite as obvious as that. But the one I'm thinking of is one that the FTC, which is the sort of general...
Federal Trade Commission.
Yeah. So sort of general commercial regulator, I guess, has announced in partnership with a bunch of attorney generals, or attorneys general, I think is the grammatically correct way of saying it.
You do, yeah.
Yeah. 48 of them, that they're going to sue Facebook for anti-competitive behaviour. Now, there's two main aspects to this. One is just proper anti-competitive litigation, that they've used their dominant position to screw down software developers, to manipulate the market, to do all that stuff, the kind of stuff that the European Commission... that's why I'll stop dissing the European Commission and applaud them when they have a go at this stuff.
Yeah.
Because any company that gets big enough, as I've said loads of times before, Adam Smith said it in the late 1700s, company gets big enough, it's going to take the piss, to paraphrase Adam Smith. And so that's all fine. But the headline aspect of their action was for them to say that they bought Instagram in 2012 and WhatsApp in 2014 in order to reduce competition.
Yeah,
and that in
deals
itself,
that they greenlit.
And that in itself is bad. So yes, as you say, the really absurd part is that this was the Instagram one, because I think Instagram was a US company, was just a matter for the FTC anyway. Mm-hmm. And they did their due diligence, had a butcher's, and went, yeah, go on.
But I bet they didn't say in this thing they've come out with this week, sorry, we fucked up when we allowed that deal to go through.
No, I mean, it's so shoddy and flimsy and amateurish, the press release. I was genuinely shocked, and I'm fairly jaded.
No.
Yeah, as you may have noticed, Ian, I'm a fairly cynical bloke. And they go, yeah, so the essence of it was basically saying that Facebook's heart was in the wrong place. They didn't do it for good, wholesome reasons, like they thought their users would appreciate being able to get a bunch of stuff from the same point. They did it to stifle competition. And it's like, so are you saying that any time someone buys one of their competitors, that's bad?
Yeah.
Because that's nearly all M&A, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're Intel, you don't go and buy Marks and Spencers, although they have done some crazy acquisitions in their time. But on the whole, you buy someone that's either a direct competitor or very adjacent to what you do because of synergies and all those words.
And this is part of
that
some
crop
crazy
up.
Diversification strategy, like Orange buying a bank, but
you get some crazy stuff. So that in itself was bad. Then there's as Facebook characterised it in their response, it's them wanting to do a do-over, is how they characterised it. In other words, we were all right with it 8 years ago, but now we're not.
Yeah.
That's just not how things work. I mean, that's not how due process works. You go through a process, you green light it, you can't undo it.
Well, it'd be like the European Commission coming along and going, oh, you know that Nokia Alcatel-Lucent deal we allowed to go through back in 2016? Wasn't a good idea. Everybody's complaining about vendor diversity. We're going to unroll that deal now.
Yeah. And I mean, how do you undo it anyway?
Yeah.
How do you undo several years of assimilation?
Instagram's exactly. It's so integrated into the systems now of Facebook. I know it's still a separate service that you can use, but there's obviously a lot of synergies is the word they're going to try and realise. So it's crazy.
And, and what does it say about its effect on the M&A market full stop?
Yeah.
So what if, I don't think anyone thinks M&A is intrinsically bad. We can certainly argue a lot of mergers and acquisitions have been shit in hindsight.
I think most of them turn out to be shit.
They do often turn out to be. But that doesn't mean they're evil. It just means they're misguided and badly thought through, or even just badly executed. But if they're saying that any M&A at any time in the future can be relitigated and undone by force, then that's a massive extra risk component to doing any of these kinds of things. And so in terms of just due process, which is a bit of a bugbear of mine, what I mean by due process is there has to be rules of engagement for everyone. It'd be like playing a football game where one side uses different rules than the other side. Well, one side can pick the ball up, but the other side can't. It's just got to be. They've got to be equal rules for everyone, and they've got to be equally enforced. I mean, that's where you get a lot of stuff. Again, to go back to football, people freak out about the refereeing because someone's, if they lose, they were convinced that the refereeing was biased against them. I certainly, all my Arsenal mates never shut up about that one.
Well, that's part of the beauty of the game, isn't it? Really?
That's part of it.
So you can have stupid conversations in the pub, even though it's quite obvious that your opinion is based on which team you support.
Yeah. I don't know if just to beat my own chest, I don't know if you got to the bit in my book where they have the
I was thinking about that one, yeah.
Well, that was so the reason I wrote that, partly because I've had those chats with my mates countless times, but it was just to point out how the utter subjectivity of it all. Rationality just goes out the window.
Yeah.
And so they're basically saying that we're going to not introduce a subjective element into it in retrospect. And what they really seem to be saying is it went too well for Facebook.
Yeah.
If Facebook had botched the acquisition, this wouldn't be happening. So they're not just saying that we'll relitigate years-old M&A, but we're more likely to do it if it goes well. It's just so amazingly misguided. And the US press has sort of meekly, New York Times, Washington Post have been writing these sort of very subdued articles going, well, they might struggle to pull this one off. And I mean, you didn't know much about this coming in, but from what you've heard so far, granted, I've given you my point of view, but from the information I've given you, do you agree that it seems like a really ill-advised effort?
Well, it's kind of preposterous because the fact they greenlit the deal in the first place. I mean, they're just sort of owning up to their own shortcomings, really, and I think that the big tech companies in the US, as we've just been saying, are a concern for regulators and for all of us. And regulators are there presumably to protect us. That's what they're supposed to be doing. And I do think it's a worry. And this ties in with some of the stuff we were talking about earlier to do with 6G and where technology is going and the fact that it is a lot of the
common thread in all three things.
6G is really desperate to sort of actually position itself in some of these areas where they see technology innovation happening. I'm not actually sure how much of it's relevant to mobile specifically, but the companies that have been leading the charge in technology are obviously those big US tech firms for the last few years. And and coronavirus and the pandemic has strengthened their position in a lot of sectors, I think, because it's accelerated a shift towards use of social media, towards online shopping, towards all these sorts of things. And so it doesn't surprise me that regulators are now taking a hard look at them. But basically, they kind of fucked up a few years ago. If they people were questioning that move when it happened. I remember The Economist actually writing a few pieces saying probably those deals for Instagram and WhatsApp shouldn't have been allowed
because they were big apps at the time. It's not like they just bought little startups.
Well, they weren't. I think that this is the reason they got through is because regulators didn't really understand what was going on. They didn't see, because WhatsApp was so much smaller in terms of what it was popular, but it didn't make money.
It was the dominant instant messaging.
It was dominant.
At the time.
I think it was, but it wasn't, because they tend to look at these things on the basis of revenues, probably, don't
rather
they?
Rather
than actual user base and what it means in terms of.
Right,
so they just their whole sort of matrix for looking at this stuff is kind of entirely wrong, and. And then so they allowed it to happen, and now they're thinking, well, perhaps it wasn't such a good thing because there's too much concentration in this market, and it's been quite a controversial year for Facebook anyway. But the other thing I find a bit curious is Facebook always seems to be the company that's in the kind of crosshairs at the moment on this front, and the one that I find the scariest right now is actually Amazon. I mean, Google's got a monopoly in search, but a lot of people would say that's not such a bad thing. You need a search engine to have a sort of network effect for it to be usable anyway. And I know Alphabet's trying to push into all sorts of different areas, but a lot of them haven't been very successful.
And it's hard to see how Google, even though I use Gmail, I use Google Pay, I use Google Search, I use Google Drive for my writing and that sort of thing. Yeah. It's still hard to see how Google could sort of take over my life.
Yeah.
Whereas
it's the one I don't feel. I actually do. I suppose I do use it a lot at work because we all use Google just to search up stories and to look for things. But I kind of feel increasingly that Amazon is hard to escape from on a sort of daily basis.
Are you talking about just the retail side?
everything. I mean, I'm watching TV on Amazon. I've got stuff turning up on the doorstep that's from Amazon.
Barely a day goes
There's a
by.
Speaker in the house that sometimes pings and tells me what the weather is if we've got it plugged in.
I'm not having that.
We've disconnected it recently, but we've got a tablet there in there.
Burn it in the garden. Stamp on the embers. Do you know what I mean? It'll start going. You'll try and burn it and go, I can't let you do that, Ian. It'll start hell.
So
stuff.
it's and then you read the news and you read that some other retail outlet's about to shut down because it spent several months in lockdown, and by the way, everybody's buying this stuff on Amazon these days anyway, and it's a really scary business.
Yeah, and then you get this coronavirus stuff where they go, don't go out, don't go to the shops, just get Amazon to do it, and then you won't get the plague.
Yeah, we don't need the high street anymore.
No, I think next year, this is probably an appropriate place to wrap it up, as this is going to be the last one of the year. I think next year is going to be all about, assuming that these vaccines kick in and things start opening up, and by this time next year, we're all just skipping about without a care in the world.
Well, let's hope that.
Yeah. So long as we've had our vaccine, otherwise we're not allowed to leave the house. I think next year is going to be all about the coronavirus lockdown hangover.
Yeah.
So often economic effects take a while to kick in, don't they? There's a sort of delay.
Yeah.
But, people are laying people off. Every day you hear a story about people laying people off. You have these small to medium-sized businesses that have just sort of hung on. But then when in the hope that things will pick up, and when they don't, because of some of the stuff you're just describing, because habits have now changed, then they go under next year. There's going to be so many bankruptcies next year. And every time one happens, there's always the danger of this sort of domino effect for confidence. One sort of relatively well-known brand goes under and everyone goes, oh, shit.
Yeah.
And then you get sort of the equivalent of a bank run.
I see a big backlash coming, actually. A big sort of reckoning coming, because a lot of people have picked teams during this process. You look at Twitter and you look at the way politicians have gone, and they've leapt very strongly one way to sort of recommending the firmest of lockdowns, and and we have to do this, otherwise we're all going to be in trouble. 2 years from now, when we've got record levels of cancer deaths, let's say, and we've got
because no one caught it early enough.
We've got the lack of confidence because people are still worried about going out, and we've got no high street stores anymore. I bet there'll be a lot of stuff written in the press about who were the politicians who who recommended that we do this, when most of the people who are actually vulnerable were in their late 80s anyway, and. I bet this happens. If you say this now, people say you're being callous, and you're sort of putting the economy ahead of people's lives.
But then people were saying that at the start,
this will very quickly change, I think.
When we're talking about like Toby Young going, where's the cost-benefit analysis, and people going,
well, the reason it'll change is because people will see the deaths coming in other areas in 2 years' time. Yeah. That'll catch up.
That'll have a delayed effect. Yeah. And then also, just continue the bleak dystopian theme before we say Happy Christmas, everyone. That's where the politics starts to get interesting, because when things get a bit moody economically, that's where you'll get some more fringe political people get a bit more prominent.
Yep.
Because they'll stand up, not populists in the way that The Economist derides populists, which I don't agree with their use of it as a pejorative, but real rabble-rousing, tub-thumping nationalist types.
Yeah.
Who'll just blame everyone and just, like the sort of Zen, it's half.
Farage.
No, much worse than Farage. I mean, Farage just
he's going to become a sort of moderate compared to what could come down the pipeline.
Farage is mainly just a sort of just wanting UK sovereignty. I've got no problem with that. There are some people scoff at that concept, but I've heard there've been people, because we've had all these. They're going down to the wire with these negotiations for the trade deal, aren't they? And various bits of sort of rhetoric flying around. But a few people on Twitter have phrased it, for me as a lever, perfectly. It's about having the people who make decisions over you be accountable directly to you, democratically. So Johnson may well be a muppet. The Tories may well be muppets. So might be Labour, Lib Dems, whatever. But at least we can vote them out every few years.
Yeah.
As part of Europe, there was no direct democratic accountability at all. So, but the flip side of that is suddenly you can get someone who's much more extreme than someone like Farage, who just sort of blames the outside world for everything and is xenophobic or racist or whatever. And then people who are desperate, people who are skint, people who feel like they've run out of options might start voting for him. Again, I kind of cover that a little bit.
Yep.
So, yes, let's see how that goes. I don't think it'll come to that. I think people are pretty sensible. I think no, you're not so sure, Pierre. I mean, you always had, like in France, for example, you had people like Le Pen, but they never quite got there, did they?
No, they go near, and then people go, okay.
Yeah, well, that's more or less what
they
I'm saying.
do well until it gets down to the last two candidates, and then you think, the other one's better than that.
I'm just taking the Brexit as an example. It was like we got near it, and guess what? It actually went over the edge.
Yeah.
Because you'd be like, oh my God, it could have been close and be a wake-up call from that.
I mean, France had a couple of close shaves with Le Pen and all that.
Yeah, but
whenever she made it to the final round, she lost she got like 30%.
Okay, well that's all I mean by close shave. The fact she made it that far.
You're likening Le Pen
or he before
to Brexit. That's maybe unfair.
I think it's unfair.
It's also mostly.
I think it's unfair, but I
know that's the way it tends to be depicted by the left-wing press, that it's this calamity that is almost like Le Pen getting in, but. Scott's a leaver, and he certainly.
No, of course, that's not how. I don't think you were making necessarily a direct comparison, but the point is, and we better wrap up because you've got to do your thing in a minute, haven't you?
Right now.
The point is when things get the more moody things get economically, the more moody they can get politically, I suppose, in a nutshell. Yeah. We can see that in 1930s Germany and all that sort of thing. Not that we want to make that direct comparison either. So on that cheery note. And I must stress, I think all three of us agree it won't come to that.
Yeah.
But I think part of our job as journalists is to anticipate things. And that's why we get this sort of Luddite sort of Terminator stuff when we're talking about 6G. So, but on that cheery note, I'm sure it'll be fine. I hope everyone does manage to have a good Christmas and that the government lets you get together with your family.
It's been cancelled.
Your thing's been cancelled?
Yeah.
So I'm just wrapping up.
So number 4 topic.
So this is the fourth
When was
act.
it cancelled?
You know, at the end of Alien, when the alien is on the spaceship and they have one extra fight, this is it. Have you seen Aliens? The second one?
Of course.
Yeah.
Who hasn't?
Yeah, of course.
This is the fourth act. Sorry, I just saw Phil's email.
Oh, right. When did he send it?
My email was turned off. I just turned it on.
I was going to bollock you for not letting me know sooner.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I'm just thinking if there's any other little telecoms-y topics. Well, actually, we were talking about Brexit in Europe. There's one I wrote up just quickly today that I quite like getting a few little digs in sometimes just to see if I can provoke people. And, I like to get digs in about Europe and all that. So we've got this M&A going on in the UK between O2 and Virgin Media. And we've chatted about this before on the pod, because originally that the sort of regulatory body that was going to oversee the M&A would have been the European Commission. But then there was this sort of thing like, well, we're leaving, so can you give it to the Competition and Markets Authority instead? And that was sort of up in the air for like over the summer. I think that the deal was like announced in like
Quite
May
recently.
or something.
The CMA taking announced recently.
Yeah, so the CMA happened in November, about a month ago. And basically the way it works with big M&A always requires sort of antitrust scrutiny, and I'm totally in favour of that.
Yeah.
From what we've just been saying about these oligopolies of these US tech giants, none of those have happened through massive M&A. I mean, there've been some. We talked about the Facebook one, and then there's Google buying things like YouTube and the ad platform that it makes most of its money from. That was quite a big acquisition back about 10 or 20 years ago. But any big M&A should be scrutinised. I don't think anyone's saying it shouldn't.
Yeah.
It's very few people. Sometimes people do that sort of reductio ad absurdum when you're a bit more laissez-faire, free market. And they go, so it should just be Wild West, should it? Everyone should be able to do what they want. No one's saying that. Calm down.
Yeah.
And it was right that the CMA, that the UK authority, got control of this thing. So they did in November. And so phase one of these things is to see whether there's a need to look a bit more deeply into whether there are competition concerns. And there are clear competition concerns by default with any big M&A, especially when they're companies in the same space. Again, it's not, it's not O2 buying Marks and Spencers or whatever. And so they fast-tracked it and they said, okay, we'll try and get phase one done by end of January next year. And they've got it done by today. The, what is it, the 11th, 12th? One of those.
11th.
11th of December. which is, a month and a half ahead of schedule, which is a pretty good effort. And so I put in a little cheeky headline going, UK shows Europe how to do it by getting on with this thing. But, I'm doing it partly to provoke, and
but it's
I
gone
do
into
like
an
triggering
in-depth
Ramonas.
investigation now, hasn't it?
So now it's going straight to phase 2.
Yeah.
In other words, it's getting on with it.
Yeah.
That's all it is. They announced this thing in May. Europe only got round to going, oh, go on then, you deal with it by November. So that's 5 months lost. These sorts of bureaucratic inertia do get in the way of things. Obviously, things have to be done properly. Although, having said that, going back to all the coronavirus stuff, it's funny how they can get a shift on when it comes to approve bureaucratic processes when they put their mind to it.
Yeah, exactly.
How long does it normally take to develop a vaccine? 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, what do they normally do then? Just have lots of cups of tea?
God knows.
I think the funding is kind of reduced compared to what they got this year.
Oh, no doubt, yeah.
Probably. But I don't think it's 5 to 10 years. I think it's about 5 years.
Okay.
On average, probably.
All right.
I mean, I am an expert.
Yes.
Please trust my words.
I'll defer to that. 5 years is fine, but we've managed it in 9 months.
Yeah. But I think it's because it's sort of like a variety of something we know already, rather than,
There are extenuating circumstances, and there's obviously a great sense of urgency. The point I'm trying to make isn't a sort of, it's probably dodgy because it was done so quickly, although I think there are arguments to be made in that direction.
I think there was already a couple of allergic reactions to it.
I know, where they got some
fine.
kind of,
I mean,
where their face went weird.
Really? Oh, right.
Yeah.
I think it'll be fine. I think, they'll be like...
Is this again drawing on your scientific expertise?
Exactly. No, my gut feeling.
Yeah.
It'll be like,
that's all any of us have got.
They'll do like 1 million vaccination, and then there'll be like 100 people that don't do well with it. And I'll be like, well, I like those odds.
But that's good. Yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah.
I don't quite know the percentage, but 0.01% or whatever. Dodgy outcome. Those are odds I can deal with.
And the families will sue, and they'll get loads of money. They'll be happy. Cynical, sorry.
Yeah. But the point I'm making is that the regulatory process, it's funny how it can get accelerated when you put your mind to it.
Well, did you see what Fauci said about... This is when we start getting comments on the podcast. Stick to what you know.
No, well, too bad.
Fauci said...
We go off on tangents. It's what we do.
I mean, I only heard this from my wife, who heard it from the TV, that Fauci said... He made a comment, and then he had to apologize, saying that... the UK approved it a bit too soon.
No, that's I can confirm your Chinese whispers on that one. Basically, he got a. Can you say that these days?
Yeah.
I didn't mean that in a bad way towards China. It's just that thing where you keep passing something on and it gets distorted.
Oh, it's funny. In French, we call it the Arab telephone.
It's
like a game. Yeah, I don't know why.
So they all get this sort of.
It doesn't make any sense.
They all get this country designation. It's just a game you play when you're a kid where you pass it around and see how the message ends up.
Yeah.
Anyway, yes, no, I remember that, and I think it was a political thing where people were going, how come England, the UK's the first and not US? And he sort of had a little political flap and went, well, they probably rushed it.
Yeah.
And then he got in the shit for that, and he went, no, I didn't mean that. They're great.
I mean, it's crazy. Like in the history books now, the first person to be vaccinated, it'll forever be a British person.
Yeah. And then
That's
the second person was William Shakespeare.
Yeah, I saw that.
From the Midlands as well.
Brilliant.
From Warwickshire, which is where Shakespeare lived.
But did you see what
his parents were having a laugh?
The first woman, the thing she said, it was so cute, so sad. She was like, that will, I haven't seen my family in months.
I know.
That gives me hope to see them now. Oh, I'm so sad.
Have you seen that CNN interview with that 90-year-old English posh bloke?
No.
They just found some proper old gent.
That was good.
Prince Philip?
Yeah, you've seen that.
Yeah. Prince Philip?
Yeah. And they just sort of interviewed him on the street because he just on spec just came in and went, can I have this vaccine then? And after a bit of faffing, they gave him it. And CNN was just over, because obviously we're the first country in the world that we know of to have this, so it's of interest to everyone.
Yeah.
And they're going, what's it like? And anyway, he just delivered this perfect old English gent routine. He's like, well, I fancied a bit of a vaccine. I turned up and Bob's your uncle.
Yeah.
And it's brilliant. And I'm just imagining these Americans watching it. This caricature that he must have seen.
This is how they talk.
He even seemed like a caricature to me, and I'm English.
Bad teeth, the whole lot.
I think he looked pretty good for a 91-year-old.
Yeah. Don't believe those liars on Family Guy.
It's exactly what I was going to quote, because Family Guy has those characters with the bad teeth.
No, he was in good nick for someone who's 91.
He's in great shape
and very compos mentis as well. So Sorry, that was who we were mentioning earlier, Sophie. Just sticking her head around the corner and waving.
Yeah, Sophie, you want to come in? Is she?
Are we still actually on?
We're still filming.
Where is she?
She's there.
She's worried that we're going to drag her in and make her go in front of the camera.
We're still rolling. Come in. You want to get in the camera?
You did get mentioned on the podcast.
We gave you a mention at the start.
Just lean forward on Scott. And then
she doesn't want to. Don't coerce her. Okay. Hello, Soph, and goodbye, Soph. We're going to have a bottle of champagne or two after. I'm not going to carry on with this because this will mean nothing to the people listening and watching. Yeah. We'll wrap it up anyway. We just extended it. We were going to wrap it up like 10 minutes ago, and then Pierre gave us a second lease low, so we've just been waffling pointlessly. Okay, so yes, have a good Christmas. Have a good New Year. We'll see how the podcast goes with us all having to go into quarantine after we've gone away.
Cheers to a better 2021.
Yeah.
Cheers.
God, yeah.
Cheers, mate. Okay. Thank you for watching and listening. Make sure you join us for the next one.